The Saskatchewan election candidates continue to campaign across the province and are listening to what some of the concerns are from the residents. I had a chance to chat with NDP candidate Colleen Henning about the campaigning process. Well, joining me today is Colleen Henning, the NDP candidate for Lloydminster. Now, Colleen, I know this is your first election. It's a very different procedure for many candidates in the province, as you know, this is during a pandemic. So how are you getting the message across of the NDP party to voters here in the area?
Well, so far when I've been out door knocking, I've been focused on introducing myself and asking people what their concerns are, what their concerns are as Lloydminsterites, as citizens of Saskatchewan, and what kind of things they would like to see addressed right now. And then I've sort of used those, if it's appropriate, I'll share with them things that the NDP has talked about as ways to address those. So for example, I was door knocking last night and someone expressed a concern about, the minimum wage and the inequity in Lloydminster, where on one side of the border, it's much higher than it is in Saskatchewan, higher in Alberta than in Saskatchewan, and the problems that causes. He said he wished there was a $15 minimum wage, and I was able to tell him that is actually part of our plan for revitalizing Saskatchewan after COVID. So, and that's actually been part of our plan for a long time, a $15 minimum wage. So that's sort of how I've been doing things so far, listening as much as talking.
You mentioned minimum wage being one of the things that is being brought up when you're outdoor knocking. What were some of the other things residents were bringing up to you? I know education and healthcare are big topics in Saskatchewan. So were those things that people had concerns about?
Healthcare really hasn't been brought up yet. Education has been brought up in two different ways. One is COVID and the return of elementary and secondary students to school. So particularly the lack of funding from the Saskatchewan government for schools. Both Lloydminster Catholic and Lloydminster Public are doing everything they can to make schools safe for students. Nobody doubts that. I certainly don't doubt that. I'm a teacher myself and I have great faith in both school divisions, but they are not being given the extra funds that they need to that they should have to properly take care of students. There are extra costs associated with going back to school right now. There are extra supplies, extra cleaning supplies. There's going to have to be extra janitorial time, maybe extra janitorial staff, and they're not being given extra funding for that. So that is an issue. And another issue around education is a more general one of the Sask Party is not just not funding post-secondary education as they should. They've even been cutting back some post-secondary programs, successful ones. There's a northern program called NORTEP, it's a teacher education program for the North that was very successful and very important because that is a part of Saskatchewan that's struggles economically, and they cut that program completely. It's gone. So those are a couple of issues that people mentioned.
Now, I know the NDP and Ryan Miley have voiced their frustration with the Sask Party's education plan. And what have you said to residents who are still worried about not only sending their kids back to school because of COVID, but also some concerns that some residents could have when it comes to the current education plan?
I've talked to them about some of the ideas we have and the things that we think should be in place. For example, clear guidance around masks is something that we think needs to be in place, clear guidance around masking. And on Friday, the Minister of Education actually sent out a press release that said, well, we're not having masking right now in schools, but we could. We could, but we're not, but we could, which is hardly what you would call clear guidance for anyone. So some Saskatchewan schools are doing it themselves, and they'll have to find the funds from elsewhere in their budgets to do that. Other Saskatchewan schools are not, and that is confusing for people. Is it needed? Isn't it needed? Why does one division think it's needed and another division not think it's needed? So those are the kind of things we've been talking about, and just that this plan, the way it was essentially created, each division created their own plan, but that was agreed upon back in June, that each division would create their plan, and divisions started working on their plans back in June. But things were different in June. The COVID research was at a different point in June. The state of COVID in Saskatchewan was at a different point in June. We had less COVID in Saskatchewan in June. So the plans that people were making based on June data and June information, why is that our focus in September?
And lastly, Colleen, what is your plan for the rest of the summer as we get closer to the election?
I plan at this point to continue. I will be making more phone calls soon, but I also plan to continue. The weather's good, and I plan to continue knocking on doors and meeting as many people as I can face to face, hearing what their concerns are, when appropriate, sharing with them ideas we have to address those particular concerns. Because there are other ones in Lloydminster. Jobs, obviously, is an ongoing concern, and that was a problem, an issue in Lloydminster before the pandemic, and will be an issue ongoing. And yeah, I want to be able to keep hearing from people and know what they think.
Well, Colleen, I really appreciate your time, and thank you very much for joining us.